Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening. Good to see you all. I'm just hanging out here a couple minutes till I get hopefully we'll get to quorum today. I feel like it's so hot outside. Everyone should want to be inside on a meeting, but maybe not, maybe not. I think just a couple more minutes, folks. Thank you for everyone who's here at the moment. All right, let's just say 5:05. I think we can get our quorum in the next 2 minutes. I have faith.
I'm pretty sure we have it right. We have 13 right now.
We do. Boom. See, we've spoken it into existence. All right. Well, having quorum, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So be mindful of everyone's time. Even if you are hiding in the air conditioning right now, I know everyone wants to, dive into the agenda and get through the meeting. So again, good evening. My name is Tizzy Lockman. For anyone who's on the call who I don't know already, probably not too many, and welcome to our bi-monthly full body meeting of the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity. I am here with my co-chair, Matt Den, and our members. Right, yeah, we didn't count you, Chuck, I don't think, although we're glad you're here because we've got a presentation to make. And we will go ahead and move to the next slide. So we will do the roll call in just a moment, just reminders as usual. While we are still doing virtual meetings, please keep yourself muted. You are free to use the chat function for questions and comments. Don't forget that we are recording this meeting, as you've been alerted to, and we would ask, rather than do a full roll call out loud, as we will do when we vote on things, for attendance, you can just type your name in the chat so that our staff can see that you are here and can verify that we have our quorum. A couple minutes for that. I see that Senator Lopez is here. I know he is on a telephone, so typing into the chat is not something he's going to do. I'll do it for him. Okay, so we'll wait till that starts to wane and we can move to the next slide. Okay, so we are going to start with the approval of the minutes. Those were sent to you, I believe, by Haley. So I will just look for a member of the consortium to make a motion to approve our minutes from our past meeting.
Move to accept the minutes.
Thank you, Superintendent Shelton. Do I have a second?
Second.
That was Superintendent Menzer. And so then Haley, I guess we'll go through a roll call of those present. If that works.
Sure. Kelly, do you want me to do it or?
I can do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Senator Lockman,
Yes.
Yes.
Matt Dan,
Yes.
Representative Chakotcha,
Yes.
Senator Lopez,
Yes.
Representative Smith,
Yes.
Darrell Green,
Yes.
Dan Shelton,
Yes.
Jeff Menzer,
Yes.
Joseph Jones,
Yes.
Eugene Young,
Yes.
Stephanie Ingram,
Yes.
Maria Matos. I don't think she's here. Not here. Henry Smith. I don't think he's here either. Ray Jones Avery.
Yes.
Aaron Bass is not here. Danielle Woods,
Yes.
Noel Picara,
Here,
Tika
Yeah.
Harsock.
sorry.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody?
Sounded like everyone. Good showing. Okay. Awesome. All right. We have approved minutes and a real quorum, and we can move right along in the agenda to the next slide. Okay, so we did ask for our leaders of districts and charter schools to respond to a couple of questions that we had received and we're talking through in some of our planning meetings about how they are addressing the aid that's coming from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan. So we wanted to spend some time at the front of the meeting hearing from them about how they'll be deploying those resources so we can learn more and ask any questions that might arise to help us understand how those will be supportive of equity goals. And so, okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. I'm not sure if we have on the slide the names or we just want to kind of call upon folks question by question. I think that would be fine. I know we have had some prepared responses sent to us, but we'd like to hear right from the source. So Kelly or Haley, could we just call upon our superintendents and or I know we have slides from Margie Lopez-Waite from the charter perspective representing that, and she couldn't be with us tonight. So we just call upon you all like as if you were a panel.
Sure. Does anyone want to take a stab at the first question?
I think we could just
I'll pick on Superintendent Shelton.
great.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to hit a few. I'm sure other people, we have a lot of similar things. So I won't, at least one of them, I'm going to hold off and let someone else hit. But some of our things that we're really focused on, obviously, summer school expansion and enrichment opportunities. We also have a number of partners we're doing that with in the community. We have a really large focus on high quality tutoring. We have 960 tutoring slots that are available to students within the Christina School District. And we still have a few available, although I heard we did a little push last Friday, and I heard one of our secretary's mailboxes was full. So it is possible that those were all taken today, but as of Friday, we still had a couple of slots that remained open. That's one of our big pushes for this summer. And by the way, just to kind of put it on the onset, remember this money is not a this year money, right? This is a 3-year rollout. So it's not all done at the end of this school year. Also, multiple opportunities for credit recovery. That was big for us, was making sure that we were able to, for our high school kids with credit recovery. We also, although we've expanded summer schools significantly and beyond just students with disabilities, which tended to be our focus, EL and students with disabilities, we've all expanded it beyond that. We also have expanded our ability for students to work at home. They were able to keep their Chromebooks for the summer if they wanted to, and they have opportunity to use a couple of new programs, Zern and SOAR Reading, which is math and a reading program. And then we also have a program that you're used to using, which is called iReady for both reading and math. So those are all programs that they have available to them if they aren't coming into summer school, but parents want to work with them at home. And then, of course, we are expanding significantly our social-emotional learning curriculums to prepare for students to arrive back and reintroduce them into schools next year for those that had not come in.
Thank you, Superintendent. Before I call the next school leader, I'm going to call upon Secretary Bunting, whose hand is raised. Maybe, Secretary, maybe you wanted to add some context here.
I did. Thank you. Dan is making reference to the many activities, the opportunities that are going on this summer. Much of that, though, is being covered by the second stimulus package monies, which we refer to as ESSER 2 or CRRSA for the large thing. Our ARP funds plans are not due from the districts until the 23rd of August, and only one district to date has submitted anything in relation to actual expenditures planned for ARP monies, which is the third stimulus package. So we, again, there's a huge percentage, the 20% of that new package is to be invested in, as Dan said, this money goes on for the next couple of years. So we will be working at our students' accelerated learning for several summers and after school during the winter.
Thank you, Secretary. It's helpful. I know you all sort of live and breathe this every day in terms of how interacting with these federal resources. And for the rest of us, it can be a little bit complicated. So I really appreciate that context. I'm going to go down our list of superintendents. Superintendent Shelton, thank you for starting us off. Superintendent Green.
I apologize, Senator
Oh, no,
Locke.
you're-
I'm here, multitasking.
Yep, aren't we all?
And so are we just generally answering the question around the 20%?
Sure, the learning loss. What are your preliminary thoughts on that and how you intend to or think you might anticipate deploying those funds?
Well, it's similar to what Dan alluded to, all of those various things in terms of programming, but a big thing for us is really assessing and determining where students actually are. I mean, it's one thing to, based on perception, fund things that we feel that students need, but it's ultimately our due diligence to really look at assessing, where they are within their learning to be able to adequately provide those supports, whether that's high dose tutoring, continuing with enrichment opportunities and program, which is partly our focus for this summer. We're standing up a number of different programs, Freedom School at Warner, for example. We're working with Springboard Collaborative for a reading program over the summer. But part of the challenge also is staffing. I think we've, stretched ourselves to the point where we've even offered per diem for staff to work summer programming. But in understanding where our educators are, they're looking for this summer respite and need a break. And so we're doing all the things, again, that Dan alluded to, but also Looking at beyond the summer, what does next year look like around the social emotional learning piece? Additional supports. We've given our schools the opportunity to give us perspective as to what they felt they wanted or needed. And 3 general broad buckets are reading intervention and supports, social emotional learning through additional school counseling, behavioral health supports. And then the third was really looking at our English learners and really standing up additional supports and service for our English learners as well. And then outside of our extended year programming, 12-month for students with disabilities, continuing to run those various programs that are mandated through IDEA.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to Superintendent Jeff Menzer.
Thanks, Senator Lockman. I think much to what Darrell's saying, first, we want to get a grip on where our students are by looking at the data, both the academic as well as the SEL data around students. We're looking at an SEL screener that we want to use going into the summer to try to figure out what the needs are in that space before we jump in and tackle a problem that we're not really sure we don't have our hands around. Some of the things that we're really looking at this early stage with the ESSER 3 funds is we recognize that we need to have some systems in place that can help support that amount of funding coming into the district in terms of management and processing and holding folks accountable, deliverables, managing and monitoring. So we definitely are acutely aware of a need to support our business office and our extra time program that typically was managed by a teacher who was getting an EPR for after school work in the school. And now we're talking a 20% of a large chunk of money that needs to be coordinated both for after school, before school, Saturday school, and summer programming. And we've never had a single solitary individual who managed those programs. So we're looking at some systems that are going to help us be better situated to process and manage those funds. Because if we don't, then we know we're going to overload a system that's already trying to process and run a district. And so we kind of learned a little bit from Race to the Top, some of the pitfalls that came when a windfall of money came and you start spend. And if you don't have the back of the house support, you can run into some problems. Likewise, we're looking at our infrastructure. We're going to capitalize on a district facility needs assessment that was recently done. While we did utilize much of our ESSER 2 funds for some HVAC and ventilation projects, we still have several in the hopper in our aging structures that we are going to give a good look to, along with assessing the utilization of space in our buildings and increasing our classroom space outdoors to provide more options for students and staff. The real thing for us is just continue to look at it as how are we going to sustain past the expiration of these funds. We want to make sure that we're able to maintain what we do. So we're looking at our existing systems and structures. Preliminarily, we're thinking that there needs to be an expansion and strengthening of our pre-K program. In the elementary grades, we're really seeing a lot of rate of return on reading assist. Again, those are bodies in classrooms and in school. So we're really looking at that as a possible early learning loss support. And then in our middle schools, we need to go back and revisit our middle school redesign where we aligned our middle school programming to feed the high school. We need to get back to that, to re-engage students, but then also add to the re-engagement a little bit more of a robust after school program that's not just the typical club or athletics, but more around tutoring and academic supports. And we've begun some conversations with Summer CoLab, who does work for us, obviously in the summer, but they're looking at a potential opportunity there for us to get more middle school tutoring after school. And then at our high school, kind of an odd thing to say, but we need to revisit how we rethought high school 10 years ago with Race to the Top.
Mm-hmm.
During the pandemic, we need to re-engage students in the physical sense. And I think it's taking a step back over the summer as we meet. How are we going to re-engage our high school students to get back into the educational flow of things and start preparing them for the next level? No real specific program there, but those are just the high level areas that we're going to be focusing on as we narrow down on specifics for learning loss.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we have Superintendent Joe Jones on as well.
Thank you, Senator Lockman. Good evening, everyone. I won't repeat a lot of what each of the other superintendents have mentioned. We're very similar in our approach. A couple differences that we may have. We are looking also this summer at like a CTE boot camp. So for us, and only being a high school district, we did offer this at all 4 of our schools. We wish we had more student participation. We landed at about 130 students, but it's really 2 weeks. It's within different career programs, and it's very skill specific driven. And I should say some of this falls directly within the 20%, but what Dan said beginning as well, some of it falls to the end to support it or outside of that direct 20%. I will say as an administrative team, this summer we have a summit coming up to make sure that we're developing our own capacity to lead all of this initiative well and make sure that our students are being served. And then we have several instructional days that are designed for our teachers. And so we rebooted our whole math curriculum. So we purchased a whole new math curriculum around key learning targets, aligned to different diagnostic assessments that we hope to understand where our students are at. We haven't purchased new ELA, but we have purchased different apps and programs, specific things like Pear Deck, to help us understand where our students are in real time in the classroom. We have created some in-house assessments that we believe students should be at 9th grade, 10th grade in our different core areas and even within our CTE areas. Some other things that we're looking at as well within ESL, and some of this also extends into the opportunity funding. I know we're not talking about that tonight, but I think all of our plans kind of merge in different ways and use these funds. But I can tell you at like Howard, the ESL population has grown tremendously. So we're looking at hiring a new ESL teacher and a para. We're offering ESL days for our instructors throughout the summer to come and collaborate and instructionally plan. And then also another big initiative, and Dr. Menzer alluded to this with the SEL, we are or have purchased Satchel Pulse, which is the platform we'll use for that diagnostic to help understand where our students are, social, emotional. And we just posted, we're looking to hire 2 social workers. So rather than trying to hire them as full-time, we're bidding out for contracted services through a provider. And that we believe we can sustain these social workers for at least 3 years. So that's where we are. Like I said, some of it goes beyond that 20% in a different pockets, but it all, eventually ends in the same goal of helping all our students.
Thank you so much. There was one clarifying question before we move on to our team reading Margie's response. But I guess Pear Deck, is that a diagnostic tool, curriculum with assessment tools, or what? That's from Ray Jones-Avery. And Ray, you can feel free to ask that.
Pear Deck is really a tool that
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pear Deck, and there's several of them. Pear Deck, Nearpod. There's tons of online tools that teachers use while they're instructing to determine whether or not students are learning the material. We just haven't purchased them in the past, and now we're purchasing them and expect our teachers to use them. We've talked about unfinished learning throughout all of this, but for us also, the last thing we want to do is just move forward with a curriculum and not give our teachers the tools when they are instructing our students. Now, some programs that we use won't come out, like we've used Read 180, which is a reading program, but the way we understand how the funding works, if we've used money in the past for programs like Read 180, you can't suddenly use ESSER funds for that. So there's other things we've done and will continue to do. But for these type of programs, like these formative tools that are tremendous, and most districts have them, most teachers are really awesome with them. We just haven't purchased them in the past. We will now.
Okay,
Hope that helps.
thank you. I think so. She'll let us know in the chat if not. And I think Simone Philpotts is going to read us the charter perspective on the question. There we go.
Yes, I'm right here. Thank you, Senator Lockman. So from Margie Lopez White, she says that they will be providing free summer learning opportunities to their students. For K through 8 students, the program will provide them with supports in ELA, Spanish language arts, and math. Their high school students will have credit recovery opportunities over the summer. And during the school year, they will be providing students with support inside and outside of the classroom with the use of special education teachers, English learner teachers, and para educators to reinforce the instruction delivered by regular education teachers. They're also offering after-school tutoring and support through community partners.
Thank you. That's great. And I think unless there are any questions on question 1, I think maybe we'll just go sort of backwards. That way we don't have to do too much scrolling. Maybe to read Margie's response to question 2 next. And I know that well, now we can see it. Where are you in the process of getting input from the community, and what are the opportunities for the community to provide input? So maybe we can start from our response from.
Yep. So she says that they have hosted listening sessions to get input from their school community. These sessions have been hosted in English and Spanish with all stakeholders. They met with students, families, and team members to gain an understanding of their concerns and wish lists for next school year. They'll continue to host these sessions through the 21-22 school year to assess their programs and make adjustments as needed.
Thank you. And then I think I'm just going to go backwards up the list and we can come down again. So Superintendent Jones, you're on the hot seat again. How are you addressing the community input portion, or do you intend to?
Thank you. No, of course. And I'll take this in 2 different ways. From one of our stakeholders is our business community. And we've been trying to do our best to listen to them, whether it's organizations like the Associated Builders and Contractors, ABC, or DCA. Right now, there is just a shortage, a pipeline shortage of workers in the construction fields. So for us, that's a big deal. And knowing that some of our students may not have the skills if they weren't in class. So that's why we listen to them throughout the school year, and we try to put together like the boot camps and so on to help them. And we'll run programs similar to that in the school year through extended time. So that's one like bucket that we always try to listen to with the skill sets our student needs. From a parent, we had a lot of success this year with town halls. And we do that a couple different ways. So for some are pre-recorded, some are live. They work out well when they're either way. We haven't found a much distinction between the two. And then we post it. We make sure that one is always in English. And then the very next day, within 24 hours, we always post, the recording with a translator for our Spanish speaking families, which, Del Caso at this point, I'm not sure everybody knows, but is almost 50% Hispanic. So and our ESL population has grown. So we do that as well to make sure we're listening to our families and they have the opportunity to know what's going on. So we'll continue with those town halls, but you're able to put up like within the chat feedback in those ways. And what we found as a gem is our counselors, our school counselors. I know this is beyond the community, like we're thinking, beyond the school typically the teachers and the counselors and so on, but they have such a connection with our students and families. We found that some of their feedback, directly meeting with them and asking them where we need to go, has been very helpful.
Thank you. Okay.
welcome.
Superintendent Menzer?
So one of the first groups that I can just put out there is our Citizens Finance Oversight Committee gets a monthly report out and update and opportunity to provide feedback and insight into all the funds that have been coming in from the CARES to the ESSER 2 to this larger pot in the ESSER 3. So they are definitely a pipeline for us to the community, and they are very active in their conversations and recommendations that they bring forward to our CFO as well as to our board. In terms of other community engagements, this school year, we've been engaged in a strategic planning process despite the pandemic. We've done a series of virtual focus groups with teachers, parents, community members who are they have non-student, they're just community members, as well as students. We're currently in the design phase of that project. So throughout this school year, we've been actually getting feedback from the community. And while it wasn't specific to learning loss, it's kind of hard to ignore the elephant in the room when you're talking about the strategic plan and you're living in the middle of a pandemic. So there was elements of those discussions, elements of those topics in those discussions. But specifically in July, when we come back out to the community from our design phase, there's going to be targeted focus groups around learning loss recovery and the pandemic response. Then we also will be having in early August, we will be doing a feedback session with staff and families around our safe return to in-person learning or in-person instruction and continuity of services plans that we're submitting this coming week to DOE. It's basically our protocols for returning to school. So we have, we're embedding the ESSER 3 conversations and ARP conversations into our existing strategic plan, which continues into the fall this school year as we implement it and become quarterly checkpoints for our community with the district. And that's where we are right now.
Thank you. Superintendent Green.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Lockman. And again, I think to Jeff's point, our CFRC has served as a barometer in a group that we've used to get information out just relative to CARES funding. But I think for us, we're looking at it in kind of two buckets. One is information sharing and information gathering. So whether that's our board meetings, actually engaging with Reading, you guys represent the community again. So therein lies an opportunity. We have our parent pack, through our Title I parent pack that we represent. Also have the Superintendent Parent Advisory Council to solicit and get feedback from families. I think for the summer programming per se, there really hasn't been much because there's a quick turnaround. Again, we just ended school last week and summer programming starts on Monday. So a lot of that has been leveraging our community partners, whether that be the LACC, other folks who we have 21st Century Learning grants with, as they continue and work to support the community as well. Saturday academies that we've hosted at Warner in conjunction with Hilltop. So really using and leveraging community partners as a part of that communication channel. And then going into next year, we will be accelerating our strategic planning efforts as our current plan sunsets in 2022. We're going to expedite that. And again, use multiple platforms, Superintendent Parent Advisory Council, focus groups, and other avenues. And then obviously at the individual school level, schools have their PTAs and parent groups and constituents that they work with within the respective schools to help funnel and share information as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. Superintendent Shelton.
The beauty of going last is you can kind of say ditto.
Yeah.
I will just add a couple of very specific things. We are also heavily involved in our strategic plan. So we've already done our survey work. We also had a number of focus groups with the community, faculty, parents, and students. And as already been said, you can't sort of not have the conversation about this when you're having any kind of strategic planning conversation. We also have already had a public meeting. We held it on June 3rd to talk about what are the areas of focus. And one of the ones that's number one on there is meeting the needs of the whole child. Obviously, that's strategic planning work, which we're going to move forward with sort of the strategic priorities as well as action planning teams. Is going to, whole child will have an entire focus. That's one whole section already developed or already decided upon on our strategic plan. We also had on May 25th, we had a public meeting specific to return to school this year, where we talked about our plans for return as well as got feedback from our community. And, school board meetings, CBOC, those kinds of things have already been mentioned. So I'll just move on. Thank you.
Thank you. So last but not least, and we'll go through these as quickly as possible. I know we do have more on the agenda, but the last question is a very, very equity focused one. And I think we've heard pieces of this from everyone. But of course, we want to hear about some specifics around the disproportionate impact of COVID on the underrepresented student groups rather, represented here, low-income families, students with disabilities, so on and so forth. I think particularly students experiencing homelessness. I know I've heard some questions about re-engagement of youth maybe that have been kind of, that have been difficult to keep engaged through this process. So would love to just hear a couple of thoughts from each of you on that, if there's a different response maybe than what we talked about in terms of learning loss, and as specific as possible, in your response. So Superintendent Shelton, you get to start this time.
I will model tight. Learning pods, we focused on learning pods all this year, and we will continue to focus on learning pods both summer and school year. We held a district mental health forum on May 1st and plan to continue that next year. We think that's huge. Boost 22. And then we're building care teams at each building. And it was noted, I think Joe said it, we're not just looking at ARP, right? We're hoping that HB 100 passes, which is going to increase services. We have the money coming in with the Opportunity Fund, which is going to increase services. So it's just, this is another layer, and all of those monies have an equity focus on them. So there's a focus on our higher needs students in all those pots of money. So we can build in all those pots of money to have a really comprehensive program.
Excellent. Great. Tight response. Superintendent Green.
Yeah, again, really nothing further. I think really looking at building capacity at the building level, from the classroom level on up, and kind of working from that premise, and not being so much top down. I did put in the chat, we have weekly meetings, and we'll likely, again, continue and reinstitute those when schools will start back up with our teacher union and leadership, to ensure that the supports in the classroom are meeting not only the needs of our students, but our staff members who had to endure this pandemic as well. And I think, being mindful of the context of the year that we've all lived. And I'll just take this opportunity again to say that to my colleagues, to our educators who have been on here, they did a hell of a job this past year. Going through the various changes, ensuring that students stay the key focus. And I know oftentimes we don't get the opportunity to celebrate it because we're going toward the next challenge, but I will take this opportunity to thank everyone, particularly those in Red Clay, who helped us get through this year. Job well done on behalf of our teachers, our custodial support staff, transportation department, school administrators, everyone across the board. I mean, the fact that we were able to have a fall, winter, spring sports season, the fact that we were able to distribute technology. I mean, the year that we've all lived has been an incredible one. And again, I'm thankful for our staff, again, particularly in Red Clay, but also my colleagues across the state, in particular Newcastle County, who met on a regular basis to ensure that we were doing all we could to meet the needs of our community. And so we'll continue that as we move forward, ensuring that we're dealing with the whole child, but also the whole educator as we come out of this COVID-19 haze.
Thank you so much for that. And Superintendent Menzer?
I think this again continues to be a focus. Data, SEL, and academic data for the populations that are identified in the question, I think is really important. For me, as a new superintendent who only knows the pandemic, I think it's time to re-engage and connect with community leaders and advocates around the space of what lies ahead for the next several years. Just an example is having conversations with folks at YAP around, violence prevention and mediation strategies we can provide the community. Just kind of really getting re-engaged with the advocates in the space of people returning back into school and the programs that support youth. I think in terms of our district, in terms of an equity focus, we have a really strong equity team that provides professional development for our staff. Much to Darrell's point, it really starts in the classroom, helping staff look at data through an equity lens in their classroom and make sure that they are meeting the needs of all learners in their classrooms, and continuing our work in terms of hiring and recruiting and talent development, so that the students see folks like them in front of the classrooms and leading the schools, making sure that we're keeping a focus on our educators of color as we move forward. And then we are in the middle of an equity audit that's ongoing. It started during the pandemic, and it's just a very thoughtful, methodical process of looking at our policies and practices and procedures through a lens of equity. So I think that'll definitely support this effort as the ARP rolls forth. And then the last thing I would say is these are opportunities to look at unique challenges and things that we've looked at as obstacles for years in a different way. Dan mentioned Boost 22. I think that's a great example of we're looking at an age-old dilemma, 5 or 6 districts, 500 plus students carved up all different ways. And so let's just change that and say, here's 560 students who are going to be graduating next year. What can we all do collectively to help them, no matter where they live and what district they go to? And they're there. They're our students anyway, but just looking at it through a different lens, I think there's opportunity in that. And in those opportunities, you can really zero in and target student populations that have typically struggled.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Superintendent Jones?
Thank you. Just 2 things that I'll add. We've discussed something called these are internal names, so don't laugh, but like Operation Re-engagement. So a lot of our students, particularly those that are low income and so forth, they have been more disengaged. We've seen this and we've been looking at our data. So the last thing we want is at the end of August, when we start, we are looking to come back 5 days a week. We are looking to have all our students, barring nothing out there that would prevent that, but we need our students in for all the levels of hands-on learning that they complete. So we started that recently. We've already done, of our incoming freshmen, which we have about 1,200, we've already done over 800 summer home visits. So we typically go out to people's homes, but this year we invited them in to the schools because many of them have not walked through our schools since we didn't have open houses. So that's really on this plan of engagement, and for some of our students, re-engagement and getting them back into the rhythm of coming to school every day. And so we know many need us in their lives. They're looking for us in their lives. So that's one huge piece. And we also ran an effort this school year called Project Go Get Them. And these were any students that had several absences and then suddenly weren't coming on Zoom. They fell off, really even though there was so much connection, it was very easy to disconnect quick. So, and I think Dan alluded to this a little bit, with these care teams. We have a similar framework in mind that we'll have teams of people within each school willing to go out literally to people's homes if our students aren't showing up. But then all of the additional supports everybody has mentioned, we have those as well, but are looking at some of those that we may not be able to really get in touch with and may even be reluctant to come through our doors. So those are 2 big efforts on our part.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you to all of our consortium members who just served as panelists tonight. I think that was really, really enlightening and good for those of us who don't serve in your capacity to really understand better, your thinking and your approach with these kinds of resources. Obviously it's been a really, really tough time to address learning, period, and certainly to address equity within learning in our public schools. But there does seem to be a real opportunity to use our recovery from this to head in directions that we have been hoping to head in for a long time. So it's great to hear that. in the context of sort of the multiple federal streams of funding that we're seeing. And also, I think was mentioned some of the state level context of where, we can continue to make a difference to make sure that we can sustain some of these efforts. So thank you all. Certainly, everything that was said in praise of everyone's hard work during this time, and our anticipation to see how this pays off as we go through the summer and into a year that next year will hopefully look a little bit more familiar. But thank you again for giving us all of that wonderful information. And at this point, we will move on to the next phase of our agenda. So we're just going to quickly do some updates on what's been going on at the legislature. That includes both what's been going on with the budget, which is where the bulk of our interim recommendations were squarely directed. And then we'll also talk about a couple of the bills that we endorsed and other relevant pieces of legislation. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide and I will walk us through it. So as we talked about, probably in the context of planning meetings, I guess this has happened since our last full body meeting. The Reading Consortium recommendations added up to somewhere in the realm of like $15 to $20 million in order to be fully funded for the scope of everything that we asked for. So for those of you who have not seen our interim recommendations, they are available on our website, solutionsfordelawareschools.com. You can pull it right up, read in detail what each of those were. We were able to get a significant investment and I think a really, great sort of seed money and statement of faith in the work that Reading is doing. When in joint finance markup, we were able to secure $10.24 million for the work of the Reading Consortium to be focused on those interim recommendations. 3 million of those monies are in the Department of Education's budget. So that means that they are essentially, permanent, so to speak, part of that operating budget moving forward. And so again, that's another really good, statement of faith in building and scaling. We hope these items that we think are really going to move the needle for our students. And then the remaining $7.24 million is in one-time funding. And so as is stated in the epilogue language that some of you saw that we voted on during markup, it asked for us to work to submit a plan for expenditures. And so on the next slide, I want to talk about what my co-chair Matt Dunn and I have worked on in terms of how we specifically intend to break that down. So this is proposed and nothing is final until the budget is final, which it won't be until the middle of next week. But as folks have asked, you didn't get $15 to $20 million, which things did you pick? And we've always been very clear that all of the items in our interim recommendations are important, and our intent has been, that all of these things be pursued to some degree so they can work in concert to do what we would like to do, which is to move the needle for students in Wilmington and northern Newcastle County. So this is our current proposed breakdown of how those funds would flow. $4.5 million to the outside school time services and in-school health services portion of the recommendations. Also, proposed name for that program, the Delaware Wraparound Services Initiative, and some funding there to support adaptations to support school-based health centers. 2.3 million to begin that expansion of pre-K services. That's pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, really focused on vulnerable populations in the city of Wilmington who are not currently receiving those services and receiving services in a way that will be faithful to a design that is proposed of very high quality standard of pre-K services. And then $1.3 million would go to the enhanced data collection recommendation that came from our social determinants work group. And that is to make sure that we have the data that we need to continue to advance reforms that are focused on the disparities that students are experiencing, particularly race-based data. 720,000 focused on the full school professional development proposal, modified down to fewer schools. Because obviously we had I think a 5-school proposal, so we wouldn't be able to do all 5. 600,000 for the early childhood home visitation services, such as the Nurse Family Partnership. 240,000 to support the operations of this consortium, our wonderful staff from the University of Delaware and Delaware State University, without whom we would not be able to hold these meetings and do all the work necessary of our work groups to give us these fabulous proposals. $105,000 for staff support for developmental screenings, and $100,000 to support, improved, marketing and reach for the Grow Our Own Teacher Academy programs that currently exist in our schools. So that does, I believe, I didn't triple check, but that should add up to $10.24 million. And that is how we're proposing those funds that we'll receive will flow in order to get our recommendations moving. So we're really excited. Hopefully all of you who are involved are excited as well to see that we have gained, the confidence of our colleagues in Dover to invest in the ideas that our stakeholders who've been involved in this work have put forth. So any questions? I see something's going on in the chat, but so next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about the bills that have been in play and where they stand. We have 5 legislative days left. Senate Bill 56, which permanently codifies the opportunity funding focused on our most vulnerable student populations, has passed both chambers, just needs the governor's signature in order to become law. The House Bill 86, which we also endorse, and that is the basic special education unit for kindergarten through 3rd grade, is waiting for its vote in the House, I believe. And, or actually that's come over to, we just voted that out of the Senate Education Committee. So that's waiting for a Senate vote. Sorry about that. House Bill 100 has passed in the House chamber and is coming over to the Senate to be moved in the next couple of legislative days. So there is movement in all the bills that we endorsed, and I'm hopeful that we will see all of those through. And so thanks again to members of the consortium for voting to support those. It certainly has been meaningful. Oh, Matt, sorry. Didn't see the hands.
When you were all done, I just wanted to circle back to the budget part, but I didn't
Sure.
want to.
Sorry about that. Didn't overlook that. And and then, so those are the bills that we endorsed, and there are a few other bills that came up in our conversations in our last meeting. We just wanted to circle back on those. So there is a concurrent resolution stating the need to continue our focus on modernizing Delaware's education funding system and working with the Department of Education on some data preparations for that process, which is still over in the House. So that'll need to pass there in order to come over to the Senate. House Bill 198, which requires that all districts and charter schools work African American history into curriculum, passed both chambers and was signed just last week by the governor. It was a wonderful event, great way to go into Juneteenth weekend. So that one is sort of done and dusted, and now it's just into implementation. House Bill 202, which is focused on developmental screenings, is over in the Senate now as well. And Senate Bill 99, the high needs educator student loan, did come out of committee, but from my understanding, will not come to the floor for a vote, as it will be undergoing some modifications, potential amendment, or refiling. So those are some of the bills that we discussed recently as relevant to our goals as a consortium, and just wanted to give you a little update on how they're going. And 5 legislative days doesn't sound like much, but at the end of June, a lot can happen. So we could definitely see some movement and completion on all of these efforts. If there are no questions on the bills, I'm going to go ahead and let Matt give us a final word on the budget process.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quickly mention a couple things. One of which is it's great news, obviously. There is a ton of important work for us to do going forward, because with almost all of these recommendations, a big part of why we thought they were important was how they'd be carried out, and that they not just be, how we had done pre-K in the past, how we had done wraparound services in the past. And it's going to be really important in terms of persuading the legislature and the governor to re-up and even expand them going forward, that we just be very conscientious about how they're actually implemented. So that's going to be, I think, a very important part of the work that we do. That it's terrific that it's going to happen, but we have a heavy responsibility to make sure it happens the right way. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was just to make sure that we were properly appreciative, A, of what a huge deal this is, and B, of the legislators who serve on the consortium, all of whom had a really important role in terms of making sure that it happened. And I know some of them have been on, and maybe they're not all on now, but Senator Lopez, who's brand new on the consortium, is also a member of the Joint Finance Committee and was very vocal about making sure that the recommendations got funded. It was very meaningful, I think, for some of the House members that Representative Smith was an active member of one of the groups that put these recommendations together, that he had kind of rolled up his sleeves and could vouch for the integrity and the quality of the work that had been done. There was one legislator who had some questions and concerns about some of the recommendations, but who thinks that Representative Chicocha walks on water. And he was good enough to call that legislator, address all the concerns. And, these are the kinds of things where, one person having an issue can, throw it off course. And his knowledge of these issues and credibility with his colleagues was really important. And, obviously saving Senator Lockman for last, she made this happen. And, you could watch the Joint Finance Committee hearings on TV this year. And I did. And it was like watching one of those TV dramas. And this didn't just happen. Senator Lockman was very vocal about these things having to happen. And when they didn't happen on the scale that she thought was sufficient, was very vocal about the numbers needing to go up. So I just want to make sure that we are all appreciative of the fact that she really went to bat for this, and without her having done that, it wouldn't have happened. So thank you, Senator Lockman, for making this happen.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Yes, everyone you mentioned deserves great praise. Also, Representative Williams, who's part of the social determinants work group, and also Joint Finance. So we, we have a great team on this consortium and in our work groups, and that gave me every confidence to be able to go forward and advocate so that we can fund our recommendations. So thank you all. And it is really exciting, and it certainly makes all the more important, I think, our path forward, because we have this fantastic investment in our recommendations, and now the rubber is going to start meeting the road, and we have to make sure that things are implemented with fidelity and high standards, and that we are monitoring and evaluating them. So that'll be a bit of a pivot. I think I've talked about that with all of our work group co-chairs, that now we need to make sure that we don't just sort of get recommendations and ask for money and then just see how the chips fall. We're going to be very engaged in that in the months coming forward. So really, really excited about that, and hoping that this is momentum we can continue to run with, and see those investments scale up and be made permanent in the not too distant future, and fuel our further work to do all the structural reforms and things that we want to see. And I think that's a good pivot for us to talk about our work groups.
Senator Lockman, can I
yes.
ask a quick clarifying question about the list that you presented, the recommendation for the 10.24? There's some of that is one time and part of that is ongoing. So in terms of planning and preparing for all, which of the ones are you foreseeing to be the ongoing versus the one time?
It's an excellent question, and Matt, you can certainly offer an assist if you want. We did not prescribe it to be coming from one source or the other when we talked about how the funds would flow, because of course our intention is that this all become permanent funding in next year's budget, so that won't be something that's hanging out there. Matt, you're nodding, but you're unmuted, so feel free to. Did you want to add a thought here?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to end up. Other than the things that are sort of by definition one time, like the setting up the database, I think the goal is to split them between the operating budget and one time, with the goal, as Senator Lockman said, of when we're when the budget's being put together for next year, that these would become part of the operating budget. And it's important because I think it's sort of implied in your question that getting these things, getting people to apply to do these things,
Mhm.
they're going to want to have some confidence that this is going to, not just be a one-shot deal.
Yeah, and with that trust,
Thank
that
you.
has been very much part of all of our conversations as we've navigated this process. And so it was actually really wonderful to get that 3 million in operating funds, I think, to show that we do have a toehold to scale up from. Thanks for the question. Okay, we ready for work group updates? I think the educators work group is going first, because I think we have some folks who have to hop off. And I think we just have Noelle Sakara with us to walk us through those slides. So there we are. Okay. Noelle, are you here?
Yep, I'm right here.
Awesome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. Basically, we wanted to just remind you of the work that we've done with the educator work group. So we were tasked with creating recommendations for the recruitment, retention, and equitable allocation of diverse, high-quality educators in the city of Wilmington. And just also to remind you of our two parts of that, if you want to go on to the next slide. So this is our first recommendation, which was to grow our own. That was basically a pipeline for teachers in critical shortage areas. Critical shortage by race and ethnicity, gender, and rather than subject area necessarily. So it was teachers who are mirroring the student population and the experiences of the student population, because a lot of our research showed how important that is for student success. And then our second recommendation, grow and continued, so you can just kind of review this. And also when I said teachers, we also, of course, are inclusive of a lot of people within the school that are supporting students. So you can see on here, speech language pathologists. So we're talking about, all different critical shortage area candidates. So let's go on then to recommendation 2. This one was about a whole school professional learning package. So a lot of the high quality teachers and staff were leaving schools because of the school climate and administration. So this package was intended to address that issue so that schools can not just that we have the teachers, but the schools can recruit and retain those teachers and educational staff. So these are the 2 recommendations. And what we're going to be doing is to not necessarily meet regularly, but we are going to monitor the implementation of these recommendations. Because we have a diverse work group from all different backgrounds, from all different perspectives, we would like to make sure that we are ensuring that the right people are entering the teacher pipeline. And again, because many of us have boots on the ground with people who may be good candidates for that program, that we can continue to make recommendations for who would be included in that teacher pipeline. And then for the second recommendation, we would be involved in monitoring who is receiving the professional learning package. Again, as some others were saying, just to make sure that these recommendations are implemented as intended, the way that we talked about them from the beginning, that they are targeted at the schools who need them most, and how the professional learning package is being delivered, and making sure that it's working the way that it was intended. So that's basically our plan, is to continue to convene as needed at critical stages in the implementation of these recommendations.
Thank you, Noelle. Do we have any questions for the educator work group? Not, your hand is still up, but I'm guessing it's not about that. Okay. Well, thank you. Again, as I said, I think, learning how to lean into our monitoring role as a consortium and consortium work groups is going to be really, really important in terms of our seeing these projects implemented with fidelity. And then, oh, there we go. We've already got some ideas in the chat. And then making sure that we're able to sustain these investments, and scale them up. So very excited to see your work group work with our staff to do that. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And I just wanted to add one thing that we wanted to make sure that people understand is that we're not starting new recommendations or new projects.
Mhm.
We're seeing through to make sure that we see these through to completion.
Absolutely. Yes. An important part of being an action-oriented group is that we do our follow through. Excellent. All right. We will go to the social determinants work group. And so Madam Ray Jones Avery and Superintendent Menzer, you guys, the floor is yours.
Okay, go to the next slide. So just a quick update. We continue to meet past the recommendations in the spring. We continue to focus on our efforts to strengthen our knowledge and background of the elements of our recommendations that were provided by our subgroups. So we did have a presentation on developmental screening by DDOE. Yvette Santiago did a school-based health centers presentation. We talked at our last meeting about expanding cross-district collaboration and what that could mean for the work with the Reading Consortium and for students in the city of Wilmington. And we were able to get a presentation from Kim Graham around DSU's African-Centered Trauma Center and Certificate Program that DSU is starting and working and has been rolling out and is making available this coming year. So we continue to try to educate and inform and kind of a little bit of practice what we preach. We want to make sure we've been talking a lot in our work group about networking and leveraging our relationships and our personal and professional networks in order to move the work forward of the Reading Consortium. So that's a little bit of what the cross-district collaboration is around Boost. So we're hoping to model and practice what we preach, and all with the best intents of providing the best educational outcomes for students in the city of Wilmington. And I'll turn it over to.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So we have had conversations with our leadership of the Reading Consortium, and we anticipate 5 broad streams of work. We'll take a hiatus until September through June of 2022. And those categories are continuing to facilitate conversations and be a space and a place to deepen engagement and to hear the voices of parents, students, and community representatives, as well as our educators, to encourage cross-district collaborations, but also to encourage nonprofit and higher education partnerships. We know that there are lots of them, and often we don't know all of what's going on. So that's why these conversations are so important, so that we can educate ourselves. We're really excited about Boost 2022 as an example of the cross-district collaboration. Continuing to explore and share promising best practices that support whole child social emotional learning and development. And we're also going to take a deep dive into exploring the needs of secondary students. We want to monitor the allocation of resources and the development of permanent resources, advocating to keep what is effective going, and to recommend policy and legislation as needed to drive social determinant work group outcomes and Reading Consortium outcomes, always looking at equity data as a driver to guide our work. I want to give a special acknowledgement, of course, to my co-chair, to Jason. Delaware State University co-chair Jeff Menzer, Matt Den, and he applauded everyone else, but we want to applaud Matt as well. I mean, he's dogged and great connector with people to keep these recommendations across the board front and center. I want to acknowledge our subcommittee leads, Tamara Smith, Roger Harrison, Dr. Yasser Payne, and the tireless Dawn Alexander. It was done a yeoman's job. So looking forward to what's to come. That's
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, great. Do we have any questions for the social determinants work group? I think we have a lot of members on here too. I'm excited. I'm very excited about your your buckets of work to continue exploring moving forward, the expansion to secondary. Certainly have loved watching the launch of the Boost 22 initiative and feeling like we have any connection to that, which I think is going to be a really outstanding effort. So thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing what's to come. Any questions in the chat? Okay, now we're just getting an art teacher for Warner in the chat. That's good. All right, perfect. Thank you all so much. I think, okay, settlement work group. I believe Chuck Longfellow, we have you on the line. Aaron Bass is somewhere without internet, so I'll have to do without him. All right, you're on.
All right, we've been busy. Next
Mhm.
slide, please. So past meetings throughout this past year, we've created a mission and vision, reviewed the settlement several times. We've brought some different groups in to talk with us so we can understand the larger environment better. Educators and social determinants work groups, both of those groups have come in and talked with us. We've had other speakers such as Dean Henry from University of Delaware and John Neubauer from University of Delaware and others. We talked some philosophical discussions on school funding in general, because part of the settlement coming up is a funding study. So we're kind of watching what's going on with that. We talked teacher recruitment and retention and made some recommendations. Of course, we believe that the settlement is a baseline. We'd like to see more resources come, and we'd like to see them come sooner. We also supported some of the legislation that's out there and recommended improvements to the equity statement for the certificate of necessity, and talked at length about the ombudsperson program. Next, please. So this is a graphic that the concept came from the settlement work group, but this draft was created by the University of Delaware's Institute for Public Administration. This slide and the next two, they show the minimum actions needed to be compliant with the lawsuit settlement. So this one's opportunity funding, and we've seen action already to meet and actually exceed this timeline. So next slide, please. K-3 basic special education. So we do see legislation out there that aims to accelerate the implementation, or to actually give us resources in our schools that step up to the goal for fiscal year 2024. Early education, ECAP, we see that, and we have seen some action also in the early childhood arena, including part of that the $10 million for the Reading Consortium. Next slide, please. Teacher recruitment and retention, we've seen some language in the budget, the state budget, that shows that the state is committed to meeting these timelines here. Ombudsperson it's been moving, so we have our eyes wide open, watching to see how this materializes. As we said in some meetings before, we were a little bit surprised at how fast it did move, and how the scope of work came out. The bid was put out, so we're watching to see how this comes out. Equity statement, it got completed. An independent funding assessment, we know that has to be complete by January 2024. So we're looking for how it's going to be funded and bid out over the next couple of years. Next, please. Things we're working on next. We're talking about education funding. You know, there's a lot of levers in our educational funding system, and there's how do you improve it and layer on all these additional resources that we're starting to see without there's some of the security parts in the current funding system that include some predictability around the unit system. So, our group has had some philosophical discussions about units versus non-units, and Dean Henry has given us some insight into what's being done in other states. So, of course, the settlement work group is not the group that determines what the funding system of the state of Delaware is going to be, but it's a great place to see what the options are, and we are watching that the effort toward the funding study that's supposed to come out. We also are looking with interest at the concurrent resolution that's making its way through the chambers right now too. That's kind of a parallel effort, it looks like. Talking about teacher recruitment and retention, again, not to do the work of another group, but it is part of the settlement. So we want to keep our eye on that, make sure that we can support wherever we can and support early education. I think that every group in Reading understands that that is a key to helping our kids be all they can be. Next. So I just want to see if there are any questions about the work of the settlement work group.
Awesome stuff. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat or anything. You guys really have worked incredibly hard, and I love to see it. I think, as you mentioned, you kind of have done a great job really of like bridging some of our other work groups as well, which is really wonderful, and just goes to show all of these different parts for doing
Thanks.
really serious and significant work and connecting the dots.
Thank you, Senator. And I also, Aaron and I both wanted to thank all of the work group members and the visitors who come on a frequent basis, who make our meetings so interesting.
Yes, no, you guys have dug into the stuff that can be hard to dig into, and I really see progress coming out of your work group and all of our work groups. So thank you. So if there aren't any questions, give you a round of applause like everyone else, and we'll see if we have Eugene Young and Nandi Chukocha. I know he's kind of stuck between us and his caucus, so hopefully we've got Eugene who can give us a little update. Oh, there he is.
Yes, good evening. I am here. Yeah, I think is Representative Chukocha, is he on? I know he's still going back and forth.
He may be speaking in his caucus.
Okay.
So I think the floor is yours.
No worries. We'll keep the party going. So our work group had probably had to make the most adjustments due to COVID. And so our pretty much our updates are as follows. So one is the referendum bill update. Representative Chukocha will have to get that specifically because there's so much movement going on in legislative hall. I don't know where this bill is today as of 6/17, and which could be totally different, 2 hours ago or 5 hours ago. So just the shakiness of that, so he can be able to provide a specific update that we can email to everyone. Secondly, when it comes to the work group's path forward, in the legislation, it stated specifically that the redistricting plan needed to be reviewed by the State Board of Education no later than, I believe it was April this year, April 2021. Because of COVID-19, it put us behind, obviously, behind the 8 ball when it came to that. I mean, we literally put things on hold for almost 6 months or close to. So because of the timelines being shifted, we did not meet the specific deadline that was put together pre-COVID. Therefore, we don't have essentially the authority to redistrict in a sense. So therefore, after conversations with Matt Dan, Senator Lockman, and Representative Chukocha, they plan to introduce a new bill to give the redistricting power, the same thing that was already done previously will be done again, so it won't be that much of a change. In the meantime, the work group will not meet because we don't have any type of mandate. And lastly, there will be discussions about bringing together a different set of stakeholders to address the redistricting and have more of a stake involved in Wilmington issues. And so that's kind of where we are right now. The conversations are being had, but as I said, we'll have to wait till January before we have the mandate and the timeline to get the ball rolling, because we missed the deadline because of COVID. So that's all we have for you all today. But I'm certainly here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Do we have any questions? And I can add a little bit to that too. I think, I want to give you more credit than you're giving yourself. I know that you guys certainly were in there doing the work and facilitating conversations. And I think we've seen some of the other work groups picking up some of the threads of that, whether it's cross-district collaboration, and supporting that and seeing even some efforts come to fruition, external to the consortium. So I think on some level you can take some credit for that. And then of course we're seeing the funding conversations gravitating more towards the settlement work group. So really, I think the time has come to essentially to sunset this group in anticipation of our ability to file and successfully move forward any additional legislation on redistricting specifically, and then at that time to reform a work group that could be very focused on analysis and planning related to that in the new year. So for now we sunset, but that's still part of our mandate. So we just got to pull the pieces back together.
We're not going anywhere. We're just, taking a pause for the cause. But I also just want to take this time to thank everyone from all the people that have been involved in this committee, not just the committee members, but also the staff and the team members from University of Delaware that help push everything forward, and also help kind of we're forced to be a lot more fluid because of COVID and figuring out next steps, best steps, and possible ways to move forward. So I just want to say thank you to all. And I also thank you to Senator Lockman and also Matt Dan for your support along this process, because it has been tricky trying to figure all this stuff out. So we certainly appreciate it.
Awesome, that's great. I'm looking for hands. I don't see any hands yet or anything in the chat, but thank you for the update, the honest update. And we do look forward to picking up that baton again in the future as a consortium. So if there aren't any questions, I will just repeat what has been said many times, that I think, we've had a lot to report tonight in terms of, we're on the verge of having our accomplishments in terms of the interim recommendations and the budget investments being official. We have our work groups doing a lot of really important and complex work, making a lot of hard things look almost easy, not actually easy, but something like easy, certainly, not hitting a brick wall. So I just wanted to just make sure I express my gratitude to everyone who's touched the work in any way in the last couple of years since we got started. I'm feeling really, really good about where we are, and really good about where our sights are set heading into 2022. So thank you all so much for that. And a lot of our students are really going to benefit from some of the side effects, both direct and indirect of our work. And that's huge news. I'm a little too tired right now because it's the end of June and I'm a legislator to quite celebrate, but very soon, we can have a big after party and pat ourselves on the back. So thank you. Matt, did you want to add anything else to that before we move to public comments?
No, thanks.
Okay. All right. And anyone else on the consortium have any questions or comments before we move into the public comment portion? All right, great. Looking good. We'll be very efficient tonight. Got a lot in there. So I guess we are looking now for any hands or people expressing interest in the comment box who would like to make a 3-minute public comment. Do we have anyone?
I see Bill Doolittle's hands up.
I was going to say, I saw Bill Doolittle, so I have every expectation and hope that we at least have Bill. So Bill, let's hear it.
Sure. A couple of things. First was the first presentation. The one thing I'm concerned about, and particularly with at-risk kids, is I didn't hear really a plan as to how they were going to individualize programs for the kids who had really significant learning loss, and even how the amount of learning loss was going to be calculated beyond the simple metrics of a test. Without individualized plans and teachers just doing this as they see, we're not going to get very far. Second chunk was, as you always know, I always throw the cold water that the settlement only represented, best we understand, about 20% of what's needed to actually meet the needs of our children living in poverty. So I'm always keeping on putting it out there, even though Delaware's refused for 4 decades, that we need an adequacy study like the rest of the states around us have done. So we have an endpoint to know what we need and some idea of the dollars we need to spend rather than simply just taking what dollars we can find and not really knowing that it'll ever really make the difference that we want. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. It's never cold water. It's important for us to know what footnotes to keep in mind so we can get things right. So thank you, as always. Do we have any other commenters? Okay. All right. With that, I guess I can entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting. I forget if we usually do that or not, but I'm going to entertain it anyway.
Stephanie Ingram, so moved.
All right, we've got Stephanie Ingram.
This is Kika, I second.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Looks like we'll see you on the other side of summer, but we will have planning meetings, so you can always join us there if you miss us. Have a great evening. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.